Hello, so today we're going to read only half of this book because this is a 2-day book. This is called Silent Days, Silent Dreams by Alan Say. James Castle was born on September 25th, 1899 on a farm in Garden Valley, Ohio. I think I knew him as well as anyone could know him, which wasn't very much. But I want to tell you how I remember him. He was my uncle. James opened his eyes to the world and saw things that moved and things that were still. Anything that moved seemed to scare him. He cried as his parents bobbed around him with darting eyes and flopping mouth. But James couldn't hear himself shrieking. For him, the world would always be silent. Like a small visitor in a museum, he stared at the unmoving faces in frames hanging on the walls. His father was the postmaster of their small community. The castle living room served as a post office and a general store. James played with catalogs, books, stamped envelopes, and packages that cluttered the mailroom. One day he discovered pencils and started to draw. His parents gave him scrap paper to keep him occupied. Soon James was old enough to start school. On the way there, he stopped at every road sign to figure out what it meant. He never found out, but later he would put made-up signs in his drawings, which no one knew what to make of, so they called them totems. James saw more people than he had ever seen before. With darting eyes and flapping mouths, from that day he would always be afraid of strangers. They're making fun of him here. So what do we think is wrong? James scared everyone with shrieks he couldn't hear. His father slapped him and locked him up in the attic. Jimmy's quiet time, the father told the family. One afternoon, when James was let out after a long quiet time, he looked for a place to hide. He sneaked up the loft of the unused ice house and saw a living picture framed by the open door. He was just looking out the window. James collected trash paper around the farm and drew on it with burnt matchsticks. He drew everything from memory and hid the drawings in the walls of his first studio. I bet his first studio would be where he would be locked up. His father tried to make him work on the farm, but James only got in everybody's way. Finally, he was left alone to play while the family worked. They called him Dummy. James couldn't hear it, but he saw what it meant on their faces. James spent so much time in the attic that it got to be his room. When his mother put a mattress on the floor, he drew the kind of bed he wanted instead. Then he drew all the things he wanted and put them in an imaginary house of his own. He lined up the drawings against the attic walls. It must have looked like kind of an art gallery in there. So that's what it actually looked like, but then he made it into his own art gallery. Nellie, the second eldest of James's sisters, had been born with hearing, but when she was 6 or 7, measles made her deaf. When James was 10, he and Nellie were sent to attend the Idaho School for the Deaf and the Blind in Gooding, about 160 miles from Garden Valley. "17-year-old Nellie turned out to be a model student. James failed at everything, but Nellie told me about the 2 discoveries her kid brother made at the school that changed him for good. One was the school library, a room with the walls covered with books like gorgeous wallpaper. Then he saw a teacher sewing together a book, the way his mother sewed clothes at home. The woman was making textbooks for her students. Other teachers did the same. James never tired of watching them. For James, I think books were beautiful packages of secrets that he could never puzzle out. So he drew in them to illustrate and put his mark on pages of strange signs and symbols and make them his books. Nellie wrote home. When Jimmy missed classes, I got notes from his teachers. He liked the library. He couldn't read, but he liked to look at the pretty books. The teachers made our textbooks there. The students read them. Jimmy drew in them. He did the same with other students. Drawing them was his way of making friends. So they were actually making books, it looks like, for the blind. Art classes were given only to the girls. That made James even more secretive. And when the teachers caught him drawing, they were upset. They thought he was making fun of them and the students who couldn't see or hear. They took away all his drawing things. James ran away. I wonder why it was only for girls. Each time he was caught and brought back and made to copy out the alphabet and numerals over and over. The odd thing was that he seemed to like the punishment. He drew them endlessly, in the same way he drew everything else. Maybe he thought he was in art class. It wasn't surprising that he eventually invented his own alphabets and signs. So now, look, he's made his own. That's pretty cool. James was good with his hands and he did well in shoe repair class, but the school couldn't teach him to speak. Finally, the principal wrote to Mr. Castle that James was ineducatable. He was 15. The principal warned Mr. Castle not to give James any drawing materials at home. He said James should learn to read and write and not waste time on drawings. And we're going to quit right here for the day. Tomorrow in class, we will be reading the last half of this book. Have a great day.